also known as the Jim McCarthy Voiceovers World Headquarters Studio. This is the JMVO Weekly Primer. Please subscribe, rate, and comment via jimmccarthyvoiceovers.com/podcast. This is episode 23 of the JMVO Weekly Primer. The JMVO Weekly Primer is about making your life better through marinating your mind in good stuff. My name is Jim McCarthy, the owner, the operator, chief bottle washer, everything at jimmccarthyvoiceovers.com. I believe that as business owners, entrepreneurs, and overall salespeople, we are bombarded by negativity every day, and it's the last thing we need. So if you want to see your life and business change for the better, start consuming nurturing good stuff. And I got a great guest on. We both came from the same background, birthed from the same loins of radio where we all started. Phil's still in it. I got out of it. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but Phil Valentine of the Phil Valentine Show joins me for monumental episode number 23. Uncle Phil, thanks for being with us today, man.
Thanks for having me. I think this is maybe my first live, Facebook Live or whatever,
Really?
Yeah.
Have you been on a podcast before? I'm sure you've been on podcasts before, right?
I've done audio podcasts, but I don't think I've done the video stuff, especially live. You never know. Of course, I do live every day, but it's not on camera.
You've got a much better face than mine, so.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, not a problem, man. And, a lot of it being mainly about the, marinating our mind in good stuff. You have been known for, left-leaning talk. I mean, I think you did a stint on Air America at some point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just like that. Yeah.
Right. You and Mr. Combs when he was, God rest his soul.
I was good friends with Combs. Combs was a good guy.
He was a good guy. Yeah, he was a good guy. I liked Alan Combs. But basically, we have the similar backgrounds and everything. I have my story coming up in radio, and I'm sure you have yours. How did it all begin for you? Let's start there. Tell your story.
Well, the beginning of the beginning was I was at East Carolina University in North Carolina, majoring in business, and hated it and didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And I had a friend, actually it was my older brother's, one of his best friends, but he's like 3 years older than me. Then I went to him for some counsel because I was depressed. And I said, I don't like being here. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And I was sitting on the bed in his dorm room. And he says, well, you got a deep voice. Why don't you get in the radio? And it's like a light bulb went off. I'd never thought, I'd listened to the radio, obviously. I knew personalities on the radio. But it never dawned on me that I could actually do it. But once he said that, it was Steve Brown was the guy's name. Once he said that, I immediately said, I'm going to get into radio. It's one of those things you kind of, it was maybe an obvious thing. So I went and tried to major in broadcasting at East Carolina at the time. I guess they've changed that, but at the time you couldn't major, you could minor in it. So I found a broadcast school in Charlotte. And within about 2 or 3 weeks, I had left East Carolina University and went to Carolina School of Broadcasting in Charlotte. And I was in radio within a year.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
And it was music radio, rock radio?
Yeah. First station was K99 in Chester, South Carolina, which was about an hour. I was living in Charlotte. It was about an hour from Charlotte. I did 7 to midnight, 6 to midnight, whatever it was. And just, spinning records, playing sticks and, everything else. So, and that's how I got into it. And, I was off to the races. I interned at WIST in Charlotte, which was most everything was AM back then anyway, but it was an AM top 40 station. And then I was working, doing an intern at WRET TV in Charlotte. Mm-hmm. And the owner was trying to sell the station. And I never met the owner, but he signed my paychecks. He was trying to sell the station to start an all-news network. His name was Ted Turner. And he ended up selling the station while I was there. And then they started CNN. So I was on the ground floor of CNN. They sold the station I was working for in order to start it. So I'm sort of on the ground floor.
Did you try and reach back out to him and say, hey, can I work for CNN at some point?
No, I was going the radio route. So, it was an amazing thing, though, because, he sold that and a couple of other things in a billboard company that he had turned into I think the way I remember the story, and this may not be correct, but the way I remember the story is that Ted Turner's father had a billboard company and that was in debt like $1 million, and his father committed suicide, and that turned it around into $1 million winner and sold it, and then he got into, I don't know whether that's true or not. That's what they told that around the water cooler of their television station. That's all I knew.
Well, the radio business has been massively shifting in the past 20 years. What were your aspirations in the beginning for, did you want to move up the ranks in music radio and, make your name known there? How did that all start working out?
Yeah, I never considered talk radio until years later. And, my aspiration was to be on the air in Raleigh, because that was the big market near us. And I guess I'm trying to think, 79, but by 83, I started in 79. By 83, I was on the air at WYYD playing 4 in a row, doing 7 to midnight in Raleigh. And I thought that was the pinnacle. I said, I can't, it doesn't get any better than this. And little did I know, I got a lot better than that. Nothing wrong with Raleigh, but 7 to midnight doing music. So I was they made me a program director of a station that they owned in Greensboro. And then I got washed out in the format change about a year later, I guess it was. And that's when I decided to come to Nashville. And I came to Nashville without a job. I'd actually had a job because I was offered a job at 96 KISS to do 7 to midnight. And they told me it was down to between me and another guy from Florida. And they offered me the job, and I took it. And I still had a job in Greensboro at the time. This was before the format change. And thank goodness I didn't go in there and quit immediately, because the guy called me back the next day. He said, the guy from Florida that was competing with you, he flew in, and we just met him, and we like him, so we're going to hire him instead. So, so I said, once the format change happened and I got blown out with everybody else, I tried to sell jingles at an ad agency for about 3 months, and I made $100. It was on strict commission. And so I said, well, sales is not my forte. So I'm going to move to Nashville without a job. I'm going to be there when that next job opens at 96 KISS. So I came out to Nashville and got a job selling memberships at a health club, and then went over and talked to the guy that had hired me and then not hired me. And I said, look, I'm in town. He said, well, gosh, we need weekend folks. So he put me on weekends. And then 3 months later, the afternoon guy went to Atlanta. The night guy that had taken my job moved down to afternoons, and they put me at 7 to midnight, and I was back in the game.
You remember your first night here?
My first one.
Your first ever night here. Time, I guess.
I do, sort of. Because this radio station was literally in the middle of a cow field in Chester, South Carolina. Really, it was the FM. There was an AM/FM combination. WBZK was the AM. WDZK was the FM. And the AM was in York, South Carolina. And the FM was in the middle of a cow pasture. It was right there where the antenna was. They just had a little brick building there with about 2 rooms in it. And so, yeah, I remember going on and thinking, there's nobody here, and I don't think anybody's listening. So I think it was about it may have been 10,000 watt FM station. So pretty good. And then, I started getting phone calls, and then I said, well, gosh, people are actually listening. I'm a little bit nervous now. But yeah, I remember. I don't know that I remember the specific first night, but I certainly remember being there. And it was quite an experience. I was there for about 5 months before I left and went to Dallas, North Carolina, another big thriving metropolis.
Well, it's funny because my first night on the air was, I think I was in the production studio cutting my teeth and learning how to do production and voiceover, and that's how I started getting my voice well known on the radio station. The program director started hearing it, and at the time, the program director he had to leave. So a great buddy of mine now, he actually came on to do the program director shift. The guy who traditionally did his shift, if he had to take a break, we couldn't get a hold of him. So literally, it came down to the conversation being, "Hey, who's in the building? Who's left?" And I was in the production studio, still getting my feet wet. And my buddy comes busting, and he's like, "Hey, you want to be on the air?" And I said, "Yeah, eventually." He's like, "No, now." So my first night on Right. The 50,000 watt stick was my first foray into, oh man, it was, a little nerve wracking. But I always remembered that, even when I did college radio, and it was very limiting at that point, you're only talking to one person. That's the mentality to have. So you came to Nashville. Nashville started playing out for you, right? And
I came to, as everybody does, I came to get in the music business, and but then the radio thing took off, and I'm going, well, hell, I'll go with this. Radio seems to be working because I was doing 7 to midnight, and then within a year or so, I was doing mornings. Within a year and a half, I was doing mornings at WLAC FM 106 FM, and we had the number 2 morning show in the city behind Jerry House. That's when Jerry House was doing mornings. Could never beat Jerry House, and I hate him to this day for that. Jerry, if you're watching, I still hate you. I mean, I remember one time, and we got trends, monthly trends in the ratings, and we had a 12.4, and he had a 12, and we beat him in one monthly trend. And I said, we got him now. And then by the time the book came out, which is a 3-month rolling average, he was back on top again. So we came close, but we never beat him.
I came to town in 2005, and he was on the air then. He was good. I mean, he had a great show going.
Oh yeah, he was very good and a legend in this town. And he and I are good friends. And he's retired, but he's on. So where everybody goes to Twitter. Yeah. That's where everybody goes to Twitter after they retire. And so I see his tweets and I retweet his stuff. He's a very funny guy too.
Well, the funny thing is that, anybody can pretty much go out there now and do this and have a podcast and pretty much do their own radio show however they feel like it. So, I mean, it's funny because Trent Pender chimed in. I used to work with him over at the radio station, Mix 92.9 and Jack FM. And he says, I like listening to radio people talk about radio. We are a special breed, man.
We love to hear ourselves talk, too.
I know. Let's see, Powerhouse Radio Voice podcast happening right here, right? Richard Adam Lee. So taking from music, your pinnacle in music happened when? Was it here in Nashville in terms of doing a morning show?
Yeah, when I was doing the morning show at 106 FM, I mean, we got to be, that, like I said, we were number 2. So we're number 2. Hey. We're number 2. And then, after a while, well, I'll tell you what happened, actually. Rush Limbaugh came along, and that would have been 8. And WLAC AM, I was working with WLAC FM. WLAC AM started running Rush Limbaugh. And I remember listening to him and going, you can do that because I'd been used to listening to talk radio, and I thought it was boring, because we had a talk radio station. And, nothing against the folks that were on, but it was just kind of, everybody was sort of, they were the host and the moderator, and they were in the middle, and they just had guests, and they would, what do you think? And what do you think? I'm going, so, there's Rush out there doing bits like we were doing on FM on music. And I said, because I was doing bits, I was doing song parodies and all this stuff. And I'm going, you can do that? So I said, I got to do that because I'm sick of playing Whitney Houston. I mean, I can't play Michael Bolton one more time. And so I actually was trying to talk to the AM program director and let me do a show on, and he says, you've never done talk radio. You don't understand how different it is. And it was similar to what you were talking about, Jim, as far as, being at the right place at the right time. So there I was. I used to go, I put on a record, and his office was right around the corner from the studio. So I would stand in the doorway. We would talk politics, and I said, Alan, let me on, man. I got to get on this radio station. I want to do talk radio. He said, no, man. I mean, you're unproven. I mean, you're on the FM. You do a great job. And so finally, he said, and by that time I was doing afternoons. He got a phone call from whoever was supposed to do a show on Saturday morning, and they said they weren't going to be there, and he was going to be out of town, or I guess he would have jumped in. And he hung up the phone, and he looked up, and I was standing in the doorway. He says, you want your chance? You're on tomorrow morning. I said, great. So I went on the next morning, on Saturday morning on WLAC AM, and this would have been 1990, something like that, 92. Anyway, first phone call was from a woman who was listening to me and had just shot up heroin. And so I'm going, wow, this is,
here we are.
What a gift from God. So I said, so what are you feeling? And I asked her, and, she told me, well, And so I said, we're going to put you on hold. We're going to take some more phone calls, talk about some other, but I want to keep coming back to you. So I kept coming back to her throughout the hour. And she'd go, well, I'm just feeling, I'm going back to her as she's, I don't know, going unconscious or something. But I kept going back to the heroin woman because it's Saturday morning and there's nothing else going on. So hell, I got some woman shooting up heroin. Let's talk to her. And so I kept going back to her. I would talk about other things on the radio and then go back to the heroin lady. And so the program director who was out of town, he was listening. He listened to the tape when he got back. And he came to me on Monday and he says, we're firing the morning. There was a guy in the morning doing a team thing with a British girl. And I can't remember his name, but he said, we're firing, what's his name? We're putting you in. I went, well, I'm doing afternoons on the FM. He said, well, we're going to put you in the morning. So I did mornings and afternoons. I did mornings on the AM talk show and then afternoons on music for 6 months. Mm-hmm. And then they got a new program director, operations manager came in. He wanted to put another radio show on the mornings. And so I just went back to do that was my false start for about 6 months in talk radio. And then in 95, I actually got a call from folks at Gaylord and they said, we're putting together this station called Super Talk, 99.7 WTN. And I said, great. They said, we want you to be our morning guy. I'm your guy. So I finally got to leave Whitney Houston and Michael Bolton and had my own show. And I wasn't with anybody else. You know, the other show I was doing, this British lady, she was fine, but she was a liberal. I was a conservative. And we were just at each other's throats all the time. Flash forward through all that. And this guy that that I had taken his place had been from Huntsville. So he had come up to Nashville. This was the big break for him. I hated it for him. I mean, I didn't, you just take the job. I mean, I didn't make the decision. So I'm flash forward after a year at WTN, I got an offer to go to Philadelphia and do mornings at WWDB, which is a FM talk station there. And so I did that for about 2 years. They decided they want a Howard Stern sound-alike, so they punched my ticket. Well, the program director at WABC, Phil Boyce, lives south of New York, and he would listen to me in Philadelphia and on his way in. And so he called me when he saw in the trades that I'd gotten blown out. And he says, I want you to come up here and fill in at WABC in New York. I said, great. So I drove up there, and he's showing me around, and we opened the studio, and there's this guy getting ready to go on the radio. And he says, I want you to meet Sean Hannity. And I said, oh, how you doing, Sean? And he said, this is Phil. I didn't know who Sean. I mean, he said, this is Phil Valentine. Sean said, Phil Valentine? I used to listen to you every morning. I said, you did? He said, yeah, I was working in Huntsville. He said, my buddy got a job up there, and then they blew him out and put you in. He said, I wanted that gig. And so Sean Hannity, I gig him about this all the time. I said, he knew me, who I was, before I knew who he was. Because that's when he was just starting with Hannity and Combs. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know who Sean Hannity was. I had no idea because he had been doing nights at WABC in New York, and then they moved him down to afternoons. And I remember Phil Boyce, when we walked out of the studio, he said, that guy's got the juice. That guy's got the juice. And, the rest is history. I mean, Hannity and Combs gets popular on Fox News. A couple of years later, they start syndicating Hannity's afternoon show. And he and I remained buddies ever since, but I always give him a hard time because he knew who I was. I had no idea who he was. It's changed a little bit now, though,
It did. And it's funny because you said that, talk radio at some point had that stigma of kind of yawn central. Then you heard Rush. But I mean, then you had, Howard, who did his thing with talk radio. I mean, he originated in the music sense, but eventually became full on talk that was completely different than what you typically heard on political airwaves. I mean,
and he was the one the Philadelphia was the first market that he syndicated into. So he was in Philadelphia all the time. Yeah. And so I billed myself as the anti-Stern. And so we ended up, there was KYW, which was the all news station. They were number one. Howard Stern was number two. And I was number three in the market and was gunning for Howard. I was hoping I was going to be able to take Howard down. And that's when the new owners had this bright idea that they're going to try to out Stern. And I said, okay. So they asked me to start bringing in hookers and porn stars and stuff. And I said, I don't do that. And they said, well, if you won't do it, we'll find somebody who will. And I said, good luck to you, out Sterning Stern. So as I said, we were in third place. They blew me out. The next book with this new guy, they went to 10th place and they went to 17th place, and then they changed formats. And that was the end of talk radio. They single-handedly killed the first FM talker in the country by trying to out Stern Howard Stern, which you just don't do.
Well, he was up in the Philadelphia market, I believe, against John Del Bella, right? With the Zookeeper.
Yeah, well, he came in and he blew him out. Yeah. They blew John out and put John in afternoons. And I think they just blew out. I don't remember all the details of this, but I do remember that John, Howard made him come on the air on Howard's show and beg for his job back. And it was just humiliating, and it was horrible.
It was beautiful. But it was brutal.
So he did it, and it's just, and he said, your wife likes me better than you, and she wants me, and she wants to sleep. It was all this horrible stuff, and John just taking it. I'm going, have some dignity, man. But no, he won that afternoon gig, and so Howard Stern had told him, they said, we're blowing out. He said, you can't put him on afternoons without my permission. Yes, Howard Stern.
Yeah.
And who knows how much of that was a stunt, but, it made John look like a complete weenie.
Yeah, and Howard had he was notorious for that, and the funny thing is how true to life a lot of the characters on his show were, and Scott the engineer, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was a character on the show. I had the pleasure of meeting Scott when I was in Vegas, and he was exactly as they portrayed him, a miserable, just ornery guy. And he was an engineer. He was a true engineer. And, we were setting up the show in Vegas because he did a show every year from the Hard Rock. And we went to dinner with Scott, with the engineering team from Vegas. And the whole dinner, he's just bitching about his job, and how little he makes. And and I'm going, and at the time I had aspirations of getting back to New York and wanting to get into, I wanted to be like the imaging guy for Howard's show at that point.
Right.
And, he's telling me these nightmare stories about it. And I finally asked him, I said, why do you do this then? Why do you keep on subjecting yourself to this? He goes, oh, because I love it. Oh.
What, and quit show business?
Obviously. You're so obvious. I could tell,
Yeah.
But Howard, he was typically a lot different off the air than he was on. And
I've never met him, obviously, and I tried to stay out of his path. Me being the anti-Stern, that was asking for it. But fortunately, I never got his ire. So I felt fortunate about that because he's just absolutely brutal. I don't know whether he's any different now, but when he was on in Philadelphia, it was some pretty rank stuff he was doing. And that's why I thought it was smart of me to give people a clear alternative, because as you've listened to my show, I don't do that kind of stuff. And it was just some of the rankest, nastiest stuff. It may be even tame by today's standards. I don't know. But I remember at the time, it was just, I couldn't believe that this stuff was on the radio.
Well, the person that he dismounted was Imus, and kind of Imus had to redefine himself and reinvent himself in a way. Because Imus was the shock jock of the day.
Then he just became the crotchety old man after that,
Yeah. He I never had the pleasure of meeting him, and I've run into Stern a couple of times while being out in Vegas, and he was always been very delightful to the staff. I've seen him off the air because they did this stunt one time. It was called the Miss Butterface contest, where they would parade women out onto the stage with bags over their heads. And typically a lot of the women simply just weren't made up. They didn't have makeup on. They had their faces stripped of everything. Their hair maybe not have been washed and everything, but they had bodies that were just knockouts. They were in two-piece bikinis. They would parade one by one out on the stage, and the crowd would go nuts. And then eventually, okay, turn around, show it off and everything. Let's remove the bag from her head. And you'd hear the audible, oh, from the audience as they revealed this poor woman. And you could see, I was backstage at the time, getting them all prepped to go out on stage to be humiliated. And the realization of, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? Look on their faces when the first girl went out and they heard the reaction from the audience when they pulled the bag off their head was like, looked at them, and at that point, the humanity of like, oh my God, they'd have no idea what they got themselves into.
and they're just now realizing it. That's
Right. Miss Butterface.
Come on.
You know, everything.
I was crying out loud.
Everything's hot butterface. Is the whole notion of the contest. So he, during a break, came backstage, and I remember just sitting there and like, he comes busting through the door. I'm like, he's completely tall and overtakes the room, and he goes, and well, there he is, and he starts going, girls, ladies, let me tell you something. I really appreciate you guys wanting to do this. You're helping the show and being great sports and all this other stuff. He was very just genuinely thanking them for being on the show. Like, hey, I know what you're getting into. I know it's not going to be fun, but we really do appreciate it. And I want you to hear it from me. And it was really kind of cool of him, and it showed some character.
Make it all better.
I don't know if it made it all better, but I mean, honestly, it was literally, because I saw the girls up close. I'm like, they're not that bad.
When they tried to make them look worse, when you pull the bag off, so people would go, ugh.
Yeah, exactly. But it's funny. Did you remember a season in your life where you had that kind of hunger, though? You wanted to unseat Jerry House and unseat Howard Stern. What were the things that were going through your mind at that time? How would you prepare to try and get to your pinnacle moving throughout your career?
Well, obviously it's about, hard work and smart work and that kind of stuff. But it's also because we had a ton of consultants come through, and this has been especially true in music radio. We haven't had that many in talk radio, although I have had my sit downs with consultants from time to time. But in music radio, they were always coming through, and they're trying to tell you exactly what to do. And I heard a guy say about consultants, consultants are guys who know a lot of positions but don't know any women. And it was very true with these folks, because I'm going, have any of you ever done this before? And the general answer was no, but we know how it's supposed to be done. Well, you need to understand that these consultants are going to come and go. And if you follow them down the primrose path every time, you're not going to be true to yourself. The number one tip I can give anybody on radio is to be relatable. Be yourself, but be relatable. That's the number one thing that connects you with the audience. And if you're trying to be somebody you're not, you're never going to relate to the audience. And if you're not relating to the audience, you're not going to be on the air very long, no matter what the consultant tells you. So we actually had, because Johnny and I were doing music radio together before. We actually had a air check session where the consultant says to Johnny, I wouldn't have laughed right there. I would have laughed. And Johnny's, wouldn't have. I'm laughing because it's funny. I laugh because it's natural. You can't say, okay, now it's time to insert a laugh. So you just don't listen to these. If they've got good suggestions, and some of them had some good stuff, you take the good stuff and you leave the bad stuff, but you remain true to yourself.
That's a great tip. It's a lot of consultants. I always said engage in what I call double J, job justification, and they would actually just come up with stuff just to make them sound like, well, you got to, exactly like what you're talking about there. What? I laughed at the wrong time, really. But you were being true to yourself and authentic. And you address something that a lot of people ask me about when it comes to podcasting and things of that nature, because of my background and producing shows and being in radio. So many people do not listen back to their stuff, and that's such an integral part of it. I've listened to every show I've done doing this podcast, and so many people just get better. Yeah, you got to air check yourself. Mm-hmm. But and I tell people about running a skim tape in the back, and I said every great has done that. I said even a friend of mine, he's a drummer for Jason Aldean. His name is Rich Redmond, and he would get to the point when he was coming up and doing his 10,000 hours of getting better to master his craft. He would actually play in front of a mirror and look how he came off in front of a mirror, because he knew that was part of the total package, in addition to working on his rudiments and stuff like that. What were some of the things that really were apparent to you when you would listen back? Some things that you had to overcome. Anything kind of come to mind at all?
Especially with talk radio. Now with music radio, you're doing in little 12-second bites over a lip of a record for the most part. Mm-hmm. But with talk radio, I remember coming home. I had done so much prep my wife loves to tell this story. I prepped for about a week for my first show, and I came home and I go, what am I going to do now? I got to do another show tomorrow. I don't have another week to prep. And after a while, it starts to come naturally. I remember going home and listening to the tape and going, oh my gosh, I'm saying every other word, and I'm going, I can't believe anybody even listened to this. It was garbage. And so I got to stop saying which is still a crutch. We all say that from time to time. And there's nothing wrong with saying it when it's natural, when it's part of the conversation. Yeah. But if you're going after every word, and people are going, please stop it with the ums. So that was the main thing. When you listen back, you hear those little crutches that people fall into, and then you can help correct them. If you don't hear them, you'll never correct them.
And when you watch somebody live doing that, it's apparent. But when you listen back to it intently and you're listening to what they're saying because of the content, and they engage in those types of fillers, it starts grating on you. Well, that happened to me last week. We went to not a parent teacher, it was an introductory thing for my kid's school. And the first teacher, you could tell she was nervous. She's young. She's kind of 2 or 3 years into doing her career there. And she had what I called the forceful where she would finish a sentence and then go, and it was not even just a filler. It was just almost like a nervous tick.
Right. What you can do now is like, and then like, because I was like sitting at a restaurant like yesterday, and there was a girl like behind me, and like every other like word, and I'm going, I need to ear check this girl. Come on, please. You're going like every freaking 2 seconons. Stop it. I'm not even in a conversation. I can't stand to listen to.
And your eye starts twitching.
Oh yeah, she's right behind me, and I'm going. I'm doing my show prep as I'm eating yesterday, and she's like this, and I'm like that. I couldn't, it's so grating. You're going, why do you do this? So, that's another thing. Ear check you folks, you kids out there who aren't even in radio. You still need to ear check yourself.
Absolutely. Podcasting. You get to listen to your stuff for voiceover. I'm constantly listening back to myself and how I can make myself. I've been doing it for 20 years. Right. You still do a lot of extensive show prep. We talked about you're going on the air here in an hour. We're going to wrap up in 15, 20 minutes. Is that, you just kind of go in and it's so second nature for you. Do you research the people you interview? I'm sure you do a little bit of that still, right?
Yeah, I do. Johnny books the guest, and normally, I know who they are. I know a little bit because I know in advance, at least an hour in advance, who they're going to be, and so I'll go to their website or whatever and check them out. We don't get real intensive, and I never write questions down. And you know why I don't write questions down? Because then you end up like Larry King. You're sitting there looking at the questions, you're not listening to the answers, right. And then they give an answer that's killer, and you go, well, what about so and so? And you go, well, Larry, did you hear what they just said? One of the classic ones. If you've ever YouTubed this one time, it's Larry King interviewing Seinfeld right as the show. I think the show had just gone off the air, and he's talking about. So, tell me, when you got canceled, Larry, we didn't get canceled. We were the #1 TV show on TV. Do you do your research? He went off on him because Larry's just reading the question that some producer had given to him. I never have questions for folks, and I just ask. The person well enough, or the subject well enough that you can just ask the question. It seems like a normal conversation.
When I first started this, I actually would research the person, and I always interviewed people I had interested in, which makes it much easier to have the conversation. So I have that control. There's nobody telling me on the show. And again, either the show gets better or it gets worse, and it doesn't get exposed to different people, whatever. But my gist of doing this was to feed my creativity for staying in touch with a radio-esque type of show and stuff like that. But I would also write down questions, and I would do exactly that. And I forgot about that, the natural course of a conversation and how it has to flow. And I interviewed Brad Lee, one of the guys I told you guys should bring onto your show. He mentioned that. He says, I know, he's like, man, I don't come up with questions. I just have it. We shoot the breeze, man. And
have it like you were doing here.
Yeah, exactly. Just let the natural course of conversation go. I'm still somewhat driving the bus because we got to have a purpose and move it forward and stuff. And I don't, my interviewing skills are probably they're certainly not as sharpened as yours, but I mean, I love talking about radio and shop and stuff like that. Jessie Gilman Gustatus, she and I actually started at the same radio station. She said, great refreshers and reminders and insightful tips. Thanks for sharing. Nick Curry chiming in. He said, glad I was able to catch this, Jim. Thanks. Great work. Basically, the syndication of the talk show, how did that start coming to fruition and, start laying out? I mean, was this something that you ever imagined for yourself at one point?
Well, the beautiful thing about my life is I never imagined any of this. I'm happy doing, spinning records 7 to midnight in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so anything else is gravy. So as this, came along, as I transitioned into talk radio, obviously I'd listened to Rush Limbaugh, and I said, well, that's what you need to do. You need to be a syndicated talk show. So I was with this other company over there, and I would tell them that I want to be syndicated. We had very good ratings, and I thought that everybody did. So the program director used to come to me and he says, hey man, you need to be just doing one topic an hour. That's the way they want it done. This was the higher ups. One topic an hour. Who the heck does one topic? Man, and they're not going to syndicate you unless you do one. I said, listen to Rush, listen to Hannity, listen to any of the big ones. Nobody does one topic an hour. So we went round and round with this. And so I finally understood that there was no way, that I was going to do just one topic an hour. That's boring. Unless it's a killer topic, unless it's a 9/11 day and that's all you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I mean, you look at our show prep and this list is long as your arm. And we're doing, we have the main things that we hit and we'll talk about a little more than the others. So I finally decided these folks aren't going to syndicate me, so I'm going to go where they will. And so I made a deal with the folks at Cumulus, and they told me if you reach a certain level in the ratings, we will syndicate you. And it was about a year in, and I hit that level in the ratings with the share that they wanted. And I didn't have to say anything to them. The owner of the company called me and said, saw the ratings, great job. Just like we said, we're going to syndicate you. So they started shopping around, and they got Westwood One. And so Westwood One syndicated the thing. And then Westwood One turned to Dial Global, and then Cumulus bought it, and it became Cumulus Media something, and then they changed the name back to Westwood One. So long and short, I've been with Westwood One since we started this about 12 years ago. But it was because the owner said, you hit this mark, we're going to do, and they did what they said they were going to do.
Well, and that's for those of you who are listening, syndication, because there's so many people out there now that are starting their own podcasts, and, they've always had the bug to be on the radio. And the benefit of being on radio is that it comes with a prepackaged audience. You're getting exposure right off the bat. With a podcast, you're basically starting from scratch, trying to figure out how to build an audience without any sort of direction from a program director on how to get that edge and build that audience. Syndication, for those of you who don't know, is essentially what a podcast can do. There's no limitations to how many people can listen to a podcast and download it and spread it around and share it. Have you thought about possibly, you're doing content every day. You're kind of already beating what a lot of people have challenges with and putting out content every day. You're doing it for a living. Have you thought about packaging up your show and putting it out on a digital platform?
We have, and I think we are. The challenge with folks like us in radio is we make our money off ratings. We sell ratings. And heretofore, there hasn't been a way to quantify that as far as the ratings, but that's all changing because, Nielsen is the big, radio rater out there, and they're now understanding that they've got to incorporate, online listening and podcasts too. And so it's almost like they're setting it up, I believe, like they do with if you videotape something, if you watch whatever it is, Game of Thrones. I've never watched that though. Is that good? If you watch whatever it is you watch, if you watch it within a certain time on television, but you watch it in your own time, they still get credit for the ratings. Mm-hmm. I think there's a limit of several days or whatever that you can, but they still get maybe it's not even a limit, but that's what they're talking about doing with us. So once we have that all I don't want to encourage people to consume my product in a different way until we're able to make sure that we're getting credit for it. I mean, that's what it's all about. If I'm running people to another venue to listen to the show and we're not going to get credit for it, it doesn't make any sense for me to do that, if that makes sense. So once we get all those ducks in a row, we already put some things on SoundCloud, little bits and things like this, but we don't do entire hours. But I think we're gonna move to that eventually when we get this other thing taken care of.
You gotta figure that out, and it's one of those not fun, sticky places that you can't really live for a while because there's a saying out there: technology is like a freight train coming down the tracks, and it doesn't care who's standing on them. It's coming, whether you like it or not. But a lot of talk out there is the equity in advertising on radio or television and things of that nature. And those traditional mediums are still being, still being used. Absolutely. Of course, there's a big shift moving over to social for different people. Before we got on and went live, I actually brought up the fact that my company, Big Dot Lighting, the other company I own with a great partner of mine, we do LED lighting upgrades for commercial properties and such. We started advertising on your show. And believe it or not, in the first week, we got a hit. You did a great job in our message out there. Right.
That's what it's. Look, and see, and when you and I sat down too, because that's another thing. It's about protecting the product. As far as I'm concerned, some things aren't a good match. I always meet with clients. You and I met, and I said, well, this is a great thing. I mean, you've got something that I can talk about and feel good talking about. And when I turn folks down, which I turn about half of them down, it's nothing personal. It's just it's not a good fit for me. I may think, well, I don't believe in this product or whatever. And some of the folks get their feelings hurt. And I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. What I'm trying to tell you is if I don't believe in it, if I'm not 100% behind it, you're not going to get any results from it. So you're just going to be throwing money down a rat hole. I'm doing you a favor by telling you that we're not a good fit. That doesn't mean you don't have a good product. It means that I'm not the person to talk about your product. Maybe there's somebody else on the radio station or somebody else in the building. And I think that's important because if you start just taking sponsors just to take sponsors, and people know that it's not for real, or you take sponsors that are horrible and people have a bad experience, that bleeds over to what I do for a living, which is talk about the politics and hot topics and things. And then they stop believing that too. So you don't ever want to erode your credibility with the audience. And taking a sponsor just to make a few bucks on it is never worth it. So I'm very careful about who I take. You just squeaked in. I mean, barely squeaked in. I'm just kidding. They go, what? No, I knew you. When you walked in, and of course we connected with your radio roots and the rest of it. But then I saw the product you were doing. I said, well, this is a no-brainer. I mean, you go out there and these people are going to save money. They get better lighting and the whole 9 yards. So I'm delighted that it's worked out so well. I'm not real surprised, but I am delighted. So you got a great product. I mean, if you got a great product, you tell folks, and then it's just a natural. At that point, it's just, things happen as they're supposed to.
Well, that's the right way to go about it too, is vetting who you're talking about. Because I've certainly worked with, let's see, to be completely risque, live read whores before. Yeah. You pay them, man. Yeah. You show them. I'll talk about you all day long.
Yeah, I have, and I've warned some folks that have done this, and I've said, and the people I've warned are no longer on the radio, and there's a good reason, because it starts to erode your ratings. And when it does that, I mean, once you've lost the credibility, when you're telling you're hawking snake oil or whatever you're doing, you don't get that credibility back. It's gone, and it's gone forever. Yeah. And so I'm very guarded about that, because I consider myself to be a very honest person. I'm not going to tell people to do something that I wouldn't do. And I'm not going to do that whether it's talking about a sponsor or whether it's talking about politics or whatever. So I'm going to be 100% genuine. I'm not going to ask you to patronize a business that I wouldn't patronize. So, but I know a lot of people who don't care. Just write them a check and they'll say anything. And those people don't last very long.
Yeah, it's pretty evident. I mean, so those out there in the podcasting world, you start your own podcast, make sure you believe in what your advertiser, your potential advertiser is asking you to do. Funny thing is that one of the guys, again, that I actually told you guys to look into for a possible guest, his name is Gary Vaynerchuk, and he talks about traditional versus digital media, and he talks about day trading attention. He says, I go where the underpriced attention is, and I day trade attention with my agency. He says, oddly enough, the live read, the endorsements that are on radio, he says, I would do those all day long because of that very reason. And he's a huge digital guy, big on Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, he's got 3.2 million Instagram followers. That's a huge audience. Wow. Huge.
Gargantuan.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to what I was talking. You say, what's the secret sauce? The secret sauce is being able to relate to somebody.
Yeah.
And talk radio is not a passive format. It's not something you have on in the background. You're listening to talk radio because you're interested in what's being said. And so, by extension, when I get through and we go into a commercial break, which I'm real big on the divider. I want a sounder. I want something in between my show content and my commercial content, because I don't want people thinking I'm trying to sneak in an infomercial on them. So we go the big sounder. We'll be back in 2, and then boom, and then we go do a commercial announcement. And hopefully people will stay through that because it's still me talking, but it's still me talking about things that I think they may be interested in. It's like this whole thing with Facebook, and everybody got all upset about Cambridge Analytica. They were not hacking in anything that you haven't already put on Facebook. I mean, it's not like they knew your credit card number, the rest of it. This was all about taking what you're putting out as a profile and then tailoring commercials that fit you. Look, we're going to get the commercials anyway on Facebook and everywhere else. I'd lots rather them tailored to what I want than to something that I don't want. And I don't know why people got so upset about that, but that's target advertising. And that's basically what we try to do too. I'm not going to get on talk radio and tell you to go to a strip club. It's just, that's not going to happen. At least now I'm not. Then maybe, Howard Stern might do that. So everything that we talk about are things that you will probably be interested in as far as sponsors. We're going to talk about show topics that you're interested in, but we're also going to have sponsors on the show that we think are right down your alley that you might be interested in. And if we start veering from that and getting crazy stuff, somebody's lost their mind.
Yeah.
It ain't going to be me. I'm not going to do that.
So somebody is chiming in here who you probably very well know. I'll put his comment up here. Phil, what's the most uninformed thing you have had a manager say? You don't have to say what manager said it.
Are we talking about you, John, or what? The most? Oh gosh, there's just so much. I don't even know where to start. I'm sure if I had a few minutes, but the most uninformed thing. I don't know. I would have to think about that, John. The most uninformed. He's probably thinking of something that he knows that I know.
Yeah.
But I can't think. Right. I probably have to get Johnny B to prompt me on that. I don't know. I've had some pretty good managers though. We got a good manager now. But yeah, they've said some doozies in the.
Yeah, speaking of managers, the lady who's heading up that whole building has really turned things around quite nicely for you guys. I know that.
Yeah,
Allison, right?
Yeah, Allison's done a great job. Absolutely.
And Cumulus is, for a while there was kind of, getting in the mud, but they're really starting to turn things around. Wayne. Yeah.
The problem, the problem is, I'll get to look at the next guy. The problem is the same thing with the other big thing. They bought too many radio stations for too much money. And, that's not a programming problem. That becomes a cash flow problem. So I think they've gotten a lot of that straight, and, we're coming out the other end of it. The product, at least our product here, is quite solid. So that was never an issue. It's just, and some of the folks who made those decisions are no longer with the company. So that's what you do. I mean, we had some of the people early on in the Cumulus history that made some decisions they shouldn't have made. And so those folks are, as they say, they've gone on to future endeavors.
And, the WTN product overall, being that I came out of Vegas, and a lot of our lineup when I left was syndicated. So they were piped in from other markets. We had a live morning show And I think that was about it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, we had Dr. Laura, we had Rush, Sean Hannity on in the afternoons, and then I think it was Clark Howard who followed after Sean. And, the program directors can kind of mix and match wherever the shows go. We were 3 hours behind New York, so it kind of made sense. But when I came to Nashville and I heard, you obviously went through a couple different morning shows, but for the most part, the staples that stayed the same were Michael Del Giorno, who's great. I've met him, and he's a great guy, and you. So solid local lineup for, a very expensive format to run. That's a live lineup here locally that you can do remotes and actually attract people. Because, that's the other thing about radio is that the live remote, there's more equity for you to do a live remote and bring people in because people are interested in meeting you rather than the night jock on the music station. Because I was that guy,
Yeah, and I've been that guy too. And it's a whole different animal. It really is. The people for this format and any talk radio station are much more passionate about the format. And I think they feel more of a connection with the people that are on it too, which I think is a good thing. But of course, there are people who hate my guts too. So, that sort of comes with the territory. Thank goodness I have a thick skin and I don't care if they hate my guts. I get this stuff all the time. And my wife says, I'll read her some of the stuff and I'm just laughing. And she said, well, that just breaks my heart. I said, don't let it break your heart. If you put any stock in what this idiot's saying, then it's going to break your heart. But I don't, so I don't worry about it. I find it humorous,
and that's healthy because one of the guys I told you should get on your show, Grant Cardone, talks about. He says if you got haters, you're doing something right. Okay, he says he's even got a meme out there. It says, "Haters, bring them on, Donkey Kong." I'm good.
I had a general manager once told me, he says, if you ain't fouling, you ain't playing the game. So we foul a lot. Hopefully, I don't foul out. But we bring it right. But there are people that are, I call them hate listeners. They're going to listen just so they can hate you, and that's fine too. As long as they're listening, I don't care why they're listening.
I call it the Howard Stern effect. I tell people all the time who ask me, well, how do I get more listeners? How do I do this? And how do I get more viewers? I say, you got to be somewhat divisive. You got to put plant your flag in the soil, right, and state your truths, and what you believe. And that may not be aligned with everybody who may be attracted to you. I said, case in point is when Howard started being who he was, they started getting drop off in advertisers in Washington, I believe, when he was there. And they started looking at all the numbers and saying, well, why are we losing? He says, well, wait a minute. We lost them, but we gained these guys and then we've been chasing those guys for years. Now, all of a sudden, they want to come on board the Howard show. Well, why is that? Well, because they just understand it. The audience, they said, the people who like him listen for an average of 2 hours, reason most commonly given. I want to hear what he's going to say next. Right. And I said, well, what about the people who don't like to listen to him? Well, that's funny. They listen for 3 hours. Reason most commonly given. I want to hear what he's going to say next.
That's right. And see how bad he's going to hack me off. Yeah, we got that too. And with the sponsors too, you have to have sponsors that are somewhat bulletproof when it comes to what it is I'm saying. With the Laura Ingraham thing and with the camera hog when he's trying to get people to boycott it. Well, and there's nothing wrong with an ad agency. I don't want to get anybody upset with me, but normally on some of these Fox shows, they got the people in the sales department that are just taking phone calls from the ad agencies, and they're buying adults 25-54, and boom, 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 boom. Laura's got big numbers. We're going to buy Laura. Well, the first time Laura says something that's controversy and somebody like Camera Hog comes after her, then these people are going to skedaddle, and it looks like she's running scared, and it looks like she doesn't have a solid base or whatever. My sponsors that I talk about are people who love the show, who are loyal to me, and I'm loyal to them. And God forbid if somebody calls and starts raising hell at them, because I've known them. This has happened. People, they go, you advertise with Phil Valentine. Yeah, you don't like it? Let me tell you what. I love Phil Valentine. The advertisers get right back in their face and they go, oh, sorry, wrong number. You got to have people who are solid on your team. Mm-hmm. And that's why these endorsements work, because we don't go out to just, get anybody. We're not going, top 5, 25, 54, whatever with the ad agency. We're going targeting people that'll fit me. I fit them. They're loyal to me. I'm loyal to them. And so it's a solid relationship. And, they get down in the foxhole with you, and I get down in the foxhole with them, and don't screw with them and don't screw with me. And we're virtually bulletproof from all of this shenanigans of I'm going to boycott your sponsors.
Yeah. I got to say, Wayne Plimisser came out with the best comment so far. If Johnny B goes on vacation, Phil needs to get you to fill in. You two play off each other well. I would wholeheartily agree. I would be more than happy to do that.
There you go. As a matter of fact, you bring some lights. As you can tell, we need them in here.
Yeah, absolutely. We could certainly do that. The funny thing is that, I do a lot of voiceover and commercial production. We did a radio campaign on another radio station in town for quite some time, and you didn't get too much traction off of it. And, it's probably because of my voice,
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, because your voice, please. You're a trained professional. He's talking about his voice.
But, I mean, there's certainly, for anybody who's considering the notion of buying radio, the notion of getting that endorsement is just tremendously powerful. It's similar to what they're calling influencer marketing these days. These people building up these massive online social platform audiences that they can literally say, hey, Vaynerchuk can show up for a shoe signing because he's into his shoes, and have probably 50 to 100 people waiting for him.
That's great. That's what you want. I mean, it's that brand loyalty that you're trying to build there. So that comes with time, it comes with trust, and it comes with relatability too, like we were talking about earlier.
Authenticity as well. I mean, you got to be, like you said, who you are. But man, let's wrap it up. I mean, we're kind of coming upon an hour here. I know you got to get ready for your show. I want to thank you for coming on. I know it's that having you on is a pretty major thing for me, and I really do appreciate it. Where can people find you, man? Where can they hook up with you on social and on your website and such?
PhilValentine.com gives you the connection to everything. And of course, we're on Twitter and Facebook. I don't do Instagram and the other stuff. I got, and not that I have anything against it. I just don't have time to do all that stuff. And I think we're still on Tumblr, but we've never looked at it. Mm-hmm. So is anybody still on Tumblr? I think we still got a MySpace page too.
MySpace, you never know. They may make a comeback, but I would certainly implore you to start using Instagram because it's not as hard work as you, or make the time for it because you never know. You might be glad you did someday. So,
well, that's what I hear. A lot of people are on it, so maybe I need to add that too. But it gives me something else I got to check.
Yeah. And do you actually do that? Do you engage in the comments that on Facebook and such?
Yeah, I mean, we have the vast staff that puts some of the stuff on Twitter, and when we're trying to sell books and stuff like that. By the way, Barbican, a Sterling McQueen spy story. That's my latest novel.
There you go.
Right now, you can get it on Amazon. The first book I did too, The God Players, that the publisher has that for 99 cents on the Kindle download. I don't know how these people expect me to make money at 99 cents. I mean, what do I get from like 2 cents from that? I mean, I got to get another publishing deal. 99 cents for a book? Are you kidding me?
The book business is not profitable.
No, apparently not.
No, and I've heard that from a lot of guys.
What they call a lost leader, Jim. See, They say, well, we'll get them into to reading Phil Valentine by reading the first one for 99 cents, and then they'll buy the first Face of Janus, and then they'll buy Barbican in the subsequent book. So I understand the strategy. I'm just giving them a hard time.
Yeah. Cardone, actually, he put out several books and it helped him put him on the map because you get a couple of books out there that becomes bestsellers and all of a sudden that can feed into a speaking career and you get, oodles amount of money by doing that. His publisher, he wanted to publish another book and they, for him to jump through all the hoops to get it published, the wording in the contract didn't restrict booklets. So he actually went ahead and published a booklet on his own and did it himself below the radar, didn't even associate with the publisher. He's like, I'm doing it my way.
A booklet.
A booklet.
So what qualifies as a booklet?
It's literally
is it below 50 pages or, it's got to be a really small thing.
Small thing stapled together, a booklet, almost like a brochure. Ooh. And he sold it for maybe, $4 or $5 or he gave it away. It's called the Millionaire Booklet. He actually called it a booklet, and it lays out the steps of becoming a millionaire.
Yeah, because I'm sure the publishing company is trying to claw back into some of that money now.
Yeah, but all these guys say it's not. You don't write a book to make money. Write the book to have something to give away at a speaking event and to brand yourself. You can now call yourself an author.
Yeah, and so because we've got that as far as the Conservative's Handbook, which actually does sell very well, and it's one of those perennial things. So I do the Conservative's Handbook. I do the novels, and people say, well, what's the point of doing the novels? Because I love to write them, and I want to share them with other folks. It's sort of like it's a hobby with me. And this last one, Barbican, I don't know, it's several thousand that thing is sold so far. And so I was really surprised by it. So, maybe it's halfway successful and a hobby, but I just love doing the books. And plus I go to Europe a couple of times a year so I can do research. And I'm going back in September for the next Sterling McQueen novel. So
nice.
I get to write that off,
That's a business trip. Absolutely. And if you ever need somebody to fill in for you, just give me a call. So they can get the book from Phil Valentine or find out how to get it from philvalentine.com. Yeah,
there's a link there. There's a link to I have an Amazon authors page. There's a link for that, or you can just go to Amazon and look for Phil Valentine. By the way, I'm not that crazy black guy who's a Dr. Valentine. Mm-hmm. That's not people. There are people like their YouTube videos from a guy who thinks that I am that guy, that we're the same person. Mm-hmm. And that guy is actually a white guy posing as a black guy. It's hilarious. You ought to look that up too.
Oh my gosh.
People, I'm telling you, people are crazy.
They really are. That's very true. I'm going to put everything in the description section of the YouTube videos. Phil, thank you again for being on with me. All your contact information, how people can get a hold of you will be right down there. Please, if you are willing to share the JMVO weekly primer, please do so. I implore you to do so. I want to build my audience. We've had a really good engagement on this particular show for obvious reasons. And again, thank you, Phil, for being on the JMVO weekly primer. And someday we'll have to do it again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This is the JMVO weekly primer. Please subscribe, rate, and comment via JimMcCarthyVoiceovers.com /podcast.